Hey friends, this is Mark Suroviec, host of the Workplace Solutions podcast, inviting you to discover the joy of work. All right, how you doing today, Lucinda?
I am doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Excited to have you on the podcast today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right. My name is Lucinda Martinelli. I'm the creator and director of Whole Planet Consulting.
Fantastic. And how long have you been in that role, Lucinda?
Officially since 2019, December 2019. So I don't know how many years. 3 years?
Okay.
Something like that. I started my company unofficially probably a year before that. It's so funny because people ask and they're like, oh, when did you start your company? I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know. I never can remember.
You're like, I have a company and here's what it does.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because I had a very soft, very long, very soft opening kind of for my company. So I just started doing stuff and kind of started calling myself that. And then later, I actually got a client. And so I was like, well, I should probably fill out the paperwork. And so there's the official, there's when did I actually start? It's probably 2016, 2017. But yeah, so it's squishy.
It's similar to when folks ask my wife and I how long we were dating before we got married. They usually get two different answers because one of us was much more mature than the other one. So.
My husband and I have a similar story.
Let's go ahead and do an introductory question. I'm still looking for a word to replace the word icebreaker because I'm just trying to phase that word out of my vocabulary.
Yeah,
So
I've heard people call it an ice melter. I don't know if that's any more helpful, but
we'll try that. So for our ice melter, I've got a new deck of cards. We're going to do number 47. The worst time I broke a phone or computer.
I've never broken a phone. Everybody's broken the screen on their phone. I've never done that. Partly because I know that I'm clumsy. So I've always gotten a really robust case for my phone because I know I'm going to drop it a million times.
Any major computer mishap, maybe with a training or a program?
I don't think so. I'm an over-preparer. So I tend to have backups for things. So I've never gotten to a conference and plugged in my laptop and it didn't work or something like that. I never rely on the internet wherever I am. Yeah, Gosh, I don't think I have. What about you?
You are clearly a better professional than I am because I've got plenty of those stories.
Oh, I don't know if I'd go that far, Mark. I don't know if I'd go that far.
But I'm going to go with a cell phone story. So I got my first iPhone and got it home, dropped it onto my bumper, and it bounced off the bumper into my driveway and the screen cracked. And it was the first time I'd ever... It was the first time I'd ever cracked a screen, and I'm just like, look at this thing. So I took it into a repair place, and I asked them what it would cost for a screen repair, and they said $400 to repair the screen.
Oh,
I was like, are you kidding? I'm looking around for the secret cameras. What punk show am I on? And
you just paid what? You just paid for your nose for that thing, too. Yeah.
And just, I couldn't believe it. And so I ended up, doing the insurance claim. But still, though, I couldn't believe that I had...
Oh, man.
The first time I ever had one, I had it for less than an hour.
Oh, my goodness.
I had anticipated it, and I ordered the screen protector and the bumper case, and they arrived 2 days too late.
Oh, man. Oh, I think I'm just lucky that I haven't done that because that is totally something I would do. Completely.
All right. Fun stuff. We're having fun. We're having a chat with Lucinda here. Lucinda, can you introduce today's topic for us?
Today's topic is facilitation skills for teachers. I've developed a model of facilitation, and I've been testing it out on different groups of people to see if it applies across the facilitation world. But my focus is teachers. I have 6 skills that are in my model. We're going to go through all of those. What are the 6 skills? And we're going to talk about how teachers can better engage students using these skills.
I'm excited about today. Teachers are an audience that I have not done a ton of work with in my facilitation career, so I'm excited to have a person who has tons and tons of experience doing that. And just a couple things to review before we start. If the word facilitation or experiential learning is unfamiliar, you can go back to our episodes on what is experiential learning or what is facilitation and why should I care. Right before this episode comes out, there's an episode about the 8 R's of leading activity, which I think is pertinent to this conversation as well. So I'll shut up and let's hear more from Lucinda. So Lucinda, tell us a little bit about your background. So you mentioned a little bit at the start of what you do. So tell us a little bit about your company and how you got to where you are now.
My initial bachelor's degree is in music, and it was in music education. In the 5th year of my degree, I decided not to pursue music education. I didn't do my student teaching, and I went to the career office at my college, and I was like, so just decided to ditch my major in my 5th year. So what do I do now? And so they're like, what do you like to do? I'd like to be outdoors. I never thought that I could make a career out of that, though. I want to teach something, but I don't know what. And they're like, okay, we'll keep an eye out for something. And this was back before the internet. So we used to get a paper bulletin every couple of weeks. And in that bulletin was Nature's Classroom. Come teach outdoors. Doesn't matter what degree you have. Just come and teach something. And I was like, hey, perfect. I did that for a year and a half, and it was so much fun. I used to wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, I can't believe they pay me to do this. I get to just wake up and lead kids around the woods, and we talk about trees and we talk about all this other stuff. And that was my first introduction to facilitation. I went back to school, got certification to teach biology and general science at the secondary level. I could do that outdoor ed thing for a little while until I get a real job, quote unquote, real job. And so I started doing that. And 18 years later, I was still there, still doing that for the time being, quote unquote. And I worked myself up to a level where I was coordinating environmental education, outdoor education, low ropes, and team building. Eventually, it became obvious that I could not stay in that job for many reasons. And it became evident that I just wasn't that curious about the environmental stuff. I was working with people who were very interested in what is this plant? Is it the Western spotted knapweed or the Eastern spotted knapweed? And I was like, I don't care. I really don't care. It's
you just want to know, should you use it as toilet paper or not?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Or some like really funky thing about it that I could share with kids. Like the educational part I was into, but the rest of it, this is just not what I'm curious about. And so I had to ask myself, what am I curious about? And that led me down this rabbit hole of facilitation. I am a facilitator. And I'm trained as a teacher. I want to work in teacher education. I want to teach teachers how to facilitate. I was seeing that the curriculum was asking for teachers to facilitate in the classroom. They're asking for teachers to manage conversations and for the students to get learning out of that. And teachers are not really taught how to do that. At least I wasn't when I came up the 2 times I was trained to be a teacher. They said, classroom management, you'll have to figure that out when you're in the classroom. We really can't teach that to you.
That's what you want to hear.
Right. Yeah. So at that point, I started also going to conferences. That's where I discovered the Association for Experiential Education, which has been a big boost to my career. But I also went to art education conferences, science education, reading conference, like all these different things. And in every single content area, they were talking about some new program that everybody should do. And all it was facilitation. We need facilitation skills in the hands of teachers. But education people don't know what I mean by facilitation. So that led me to my model.
Okay. Can you give a working definition of the word facilitation and how you're using it?
Yeah. So when I say facilitation, I'm referring to 6 skills that facilitators have that they use in ways that are different from specifically a teacher. And these are the things that set aside a facilitator from a coach, from a teacher, and from a mentor. all of those roles need these skills. Facilitators use them in a specific way.
While we're talking about definitions, I'm just going to remind folks of the definition that we shared in episode 3, what is facilitation and why should I care? This isn't the definition, this is a working definition that I am operating under for this conversation, and that is facilitation is the art and science of skillfully using techniques and principles of experiential learning to help a group of people reach their goals. And I am excited to find out how much that overlaps or contrasts with Lucinda's model.
I think I might be able to sum up facilitation for myself.
Okay.
And it's similar to your definition of facilitation. Facilitation is the art and science. I also think of it as an art and a science of creating and leveraging teachable moments.
Let's go ahead and get into those 6 skills. I'm excited to learn.
The 6 skills are: go slow to go fast, be open, question genuinely, observe closely, sequence with intention, and manage risk. So those are the 6. So I like to start with go slow to go fast because that one often needs the most explanation. That phrase, go slow to go fast, I actually got from a group that I worked with. They were a business group. It was a corporate facilitation adventure kind of situation. And they talked about, as we were working together, they're like, oh, we talk about this at work. We talk about going slow to go fast. And so we delved into what they mean by that. And I was like, oh, that's totally what I do. So going slow to go fast has to do with establishing the routines, the information, and the relationships that you need to be successful. You're making sure that everyone who's working on some project or other has the information they need. You're making sure that you're figuring out what are the routines, the methods, the processes that you're going to use to solve this problem or do this thing or get through this together, and to make sure that people have a relationship with each other where they're comfortable enough so that they can talk to each other and solve problems together, be honest with each other to help this process go forward. Very often in adventure facilitation, we give people a problem to solve, and they take time and they strategize and they figure out, okay, who's going to do what and how this is going to go. And we do step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3. And then we do it. And then by practice, often they get better at it. In the classroom, teachers very much focus on the first 6 weeks of school. In fact, there's a book entitled The First 6 Weeks of School. They focus in that time period on establishing the relationships and the routines that you need to make the classroom function. So it's everything from where are the markers to when is it appropriate to go get the markers, what is it appropriate to do with the markers, but also learning names. Most teachers do this, and they find that things go better later if your kids know what the routines are. There's also been a real push lately for classroom culture, building a positive classroom culture. And that's when you start doing that. One of the things that teachers may not think about, though, is that you need to redo this process in several points throughout the year. Anytime something new happens, you need to reestablish these routines and these relationships and remind the students, okay, this is how we agreed we were going to get along when it's difficult, or in December when kids are really squirrely or whatever it may be. You need to revisit these routines and these relationships in order for things to go smoothly.
So when you say something new, like after spring break, or are you thinking more there's a new kid moves into the school and they are fresh to the classroom?
Yeah, in the last 2 years, there's been something new, something major new,
Yeah.
like every couple weeks. Oh, we're in the classroom. No, wait, we're virtual. No, wait, we're back in the classroom, but not everybody's there. Every time we made a shift like that, it's really helpful to revisit all the routines and go, okay, we've just shifted from in-person to virtual. What do these routines look like when we're virtual? How do we treat each other when we're virtual? What are the expectations? And I think that was one of the things that was really difficult about that. And I think sometimes people felt like, okay, I need to jump right back into my content without revisiting and thinking about these routines and how that was going to look. I don't fault anybody for that because goodness knows we were all thrown into it without any preparation whatsoever. But that kind of idea of going slow to go fast serves us well anytime there's some major shift or even minor shift, or like those times when there's some incident at school, but you check in with them and see, how are we doing? You know, what are the ways that we decided earlier we were going to treat each other? Let's remember to do that today. And then you can move forward. Just taking those minutes to check in is really important.
It sounds a lot like the principle that the old Navy SEALs adage, fast is slow, slow is smooth, and smooth is quick. That idea that you really have to slow down sometimes to end up being faster in the long run.
Absolutely. Yes, that's exactly that.
What's next on the list?
Next on the list is being open. And this is something that teachers struggle with a lot, I think, partly because of how they're trained. So teachers are trained to ask for information and get information back that's specific. And there's a lot of pressure on teachers to get results, to get certain specific outcomes. And they're trained to do that. What facilitators do is we're open to what can happen. We don't necessarily look for a specific outcome. We may, but we're willing to be open to a different path to get there, and or for the outcome not to be what we expected. So as I'm doing adventure facilitation, I'm giving people a problem, and I may have presented this problem to, 50 other groups before. But if I'm a good facilitator, I'm open to them solving the problem in a very different way. And I'm open to having an outcome that may be different. Their solution may be completely different from every other group I've ever seen before. And that's a positive thing. That's something I'm looking for. It's something I'm encouraging. And I know how to be flexible with my presentation, with the questions they ask me. Can I use this? I have to be open to, okay, can I let them use that? What are the things that I'm hoping they're going to get out of this? What could they do with it? Is it safe? And then I make that decision, yes or no. It's not automatically, no, you're not going to use this thing. So that's what I mean by being open. And that's something that teachers struggle with a lot. Sometimes if they feel like the outcome could be different, they get a little panicky because they want it to be very cut and dried. You do step 1, step 2, step 3, and the students end up with this. And education, really at the core of it, is not that. If education is good, students are following paths that are set by them, not necessarily by an outside agency.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're talking about the ability for students to learn beyond just the content and official answers of whatever the state 3-letter acronym test is, standards test that they have to teach to. So
yes, and they may actually end up with those answers to those standardized tests, but their path to get there might be different. And their way to show you that they know it might be different. One of the things that's really popular in education right now is project-based learning and inquiry-based learning. And both of those things require an openness to a different way to do the assignment or a different way to get to the outcomes that you're hoping for. Every time I'm open to an outcome that's different than I expected, most of the time, those outcomes are far beyond what I expected. And I think teachers are very often afraid that it's going to all hell is going to break loose if I'm open to anything. And that's not actually what happens most of the time. Most of the time they'll surprise me and I'll go, oh my gosh, that's a solution I never would have thought about. It's genius. It's brilliant. And the students are the ones who came up with it. So being open to that is really important. It is tricky though, because you also have to have boundaries so that those outcomes don't go in the tank. So you don't have students running off the cliff or whatever it may be, doing something dangerous, either to themselves or to someone else. So you do have to set boundaries, but it's good to be open within those boundaries, to set a structure and then let it go and see what happens.
All right. Number 3.
Number 3, it ties in with this really closely. Question genuinely. So in project-based learning, in inquiry-based education, one of the things that's really important is to ask questions you don't know the answer to have that outcome be open, to have the answer to that question be open. You have to not already know the answer to the question. And sometimes if you let students explore and ask a question that nobody knows the answer to, you end up with a really great result. And it's different from the question and answer that teachers are taught to do. They're taught to ask a question and look for a specific answer back. Mm-hmm. If you're teaching something, yes, you do need that. But if your students are learning, they need to be able to explore questions that don't have a specific answer or don't have an answer that you know. The other way that I tie this in for teachers is in social emotional stuff. If you're asking your student, how are you? And you're expecting a specific answer, you're not being genuine. You're not being curious about that person, and they will know that. And they will not tell you really how they're doing. And that's when you get into problems with emotional health, mental health, that kind of thing. And also it can lead to behavior stuff. I often work with students and it takes a long time to convince them that I actually want to know what they think. I'm not looking for a pat answer to the questions that I'm asking. I actually want to know how they feel about it and what they're thinking. And they're not ready for that a lot of the time. But once we get there and they understand that I'm genuine, I really want to know, then they'll tell me all kinds of stuff. It's tricky because teachers do have to wear their teacher hat. Mm-hmm. There are places where you do need that specific answer back. And then there are other places where you can be open. And with your students as people, that's where you need to be open. Mm. If you're asking how they are, they need to know that question is genuine and that you actually want to know how they are. So here's an example. When I was going back to get my teaching certification in general science and biology, I took was it chemistry? Physics. It's physics. Oh, my favorite, physics. So we would do physics labs. So we would do, step 1, step 2, step 3, follow this thing and graph your results. If you, as someone who's looking at a graph that someone made from their results that reflects the data they have, if their graph doesn't follow what you might expect, don't tell them to go back and redraw their graph to have it reflect what it's supposed to look like. That's not being open to outcome, and that's not questioning genuinely. If you're in science, you should be questioning genuinely. If you do an experiment and you get results and they are different from what you expected, you cannot fudge your results. You have to be genuine in reporting your answers. And then you go back and look and say, why is this different from what I expected? And that's where real science happens. So you have to question genuinely. You have to have that sense of inquiry and that sense of curiosity in order to really get the learning. And if you start fudging your results and you're a scientist, you are not, hopefully you're not going to last very long. That's not a good practice, let's just say.
Let's pause here for the end of part 1. We have been chatting with Lucinda Martinelli, creator and director of Whole Planet Consulting. And in part 2 of this conversation, we'll learn the other 3 facilitation skills every teacher should have and have some more fun getting to know Lucinda. We'll see you next week. Life is way too short for work to suck. So if you want help to build your team, train your team, or manage your team, we're here. Come see us at workplaysolutions.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Define markers in this context.
Oh, so things you draw with.
Oh, literally markers. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
Markers,
I was imagining like markers as in like scorecards or key performance indicators, and I'm like, oh.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.